Hi, I'm Chris Hay. I'm an independent consultant working with researchers from Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota, as well as the Iowa Soybean Association on a project trying to advance the conservation drainage practices of saturated buffers and bioreactors. One of the goals of that project is to get more management information out to farmers and landowners that have put in these practices. As more and more are going in, we recognize that there's a need for good guidance for those folks that have put in a practice on how to actually operate and manage the practice. So we put together a set of these videos as well as some other resources to help with that. Today we're going to talk about actually monitoring these practices, and so to help with that, I'm joined by Tony Seaman from the Iowa Soybean Association. Tony, maybe tell me a little bit about what you do and what you do especially with monitoring these practices.
Yeah, Chris, I'm the Water Lab Service Manager, and so I oversee our water quality monitoring programs throughout the state of Iowa, and we look at individual drainage systems and fields all the way up to large streams and rivers.
So Tony, why is it important to think about monitoring these bioreactors and saturated buffers?
Well, the short answer, Chris, is that we want to make sure that they're working properly and make sure that we're getting the most out of them. But the reasons we might do that could be we might want to use them as a demonstration to get further installation of them. We might want to report back to the funders that they're working. We may want to try and tweak the management to make sure we're maximizing their capacity. So there's a variety of reasons to pull water samples.
Okay, well, so it's a good idea. Should we monitor every single one of these saturated buffers and bioreactors?
Well, it would be good to be everywhere all at once, but we know that's not really realistic in the real world. It would be good to at least evaluate every one of them once or twice to make sure that we're getting functioning like we would expect, but we really try to research the ones that make sense too and try to extrapolate that to other sites.
Okay, and so there's some variation from site to site, and so we can't monitor them all, but monitoring some gives us some ideas of how they function in different areas, different parts of the state or in different locations.
Yep, that's correct. And you know, every soil is a little different, so to make sure that they're working as they were designed is important.
So we're not monitoring every one of them, but who typically does do monitoring of these practices?
So a lot of times it will be the local watershed project coordinator. We'll be looking at these to make sure after the installation that they're functioning properly. Sometimes universities or other researchers will want to look to maximize their design or their capacity and make sure that we're getting the most efficient reduction that we can. Groups like the Iowa Soybean Association are actively working with farmers and partners to evaluate not just how well the practice is functioning, but also what's coming off the field, the quality of the water coming off the field, and relating that to the agronomic practices that are happening in the tile drainage water initially.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the why of monitoring and a little bit of who does a lot of the monitoring. Are there times or situations where a farmer might actually want to do some monitoring of one of these practices?
Yeah, so when we think about monitoring at the field edge in a drainage system, you know, it's kind of twofold. We're looking at how the agronomic practices on the farm field are performing, and then we can evaluate the conservation practice to make sure it's functioning and further reducing the loss of those nutrients.
Okay, and so if a farmer thinks about actually wanting to do a little monitoring, when should they think about doing that?
Well, you want to get started in the spring, obviously, because that's when we see the highest amount of water typically and the most amount of nitrogen loss. But some practices may not be up to full functioning early in the spring, so it's important to do it through the season when the water's flowing, so you can evaluate how some of the factors out there affect it.
Okay, so one quick, easy way that folks can get an idea of what's happening with the water coming off the edge of the field or through their bioreactor saturated buffer would be one of these nitrate test kits. And so tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so this is kind of a simple, inexpensive way that anybody can check the amount of nitrate that's coming in and going out of a practice. And so a lot of groups, organizations will have these little kits for you, and so they come with these test strips, and what you do is you collect a sample of water, you dip the water in there, and then you wait the allotted amount of time, and you match the color. It will turn color, and you match the color to the categories on here when the time's up, and it gives you kind of a general idea of what the levels of nitrate are.
So yeah, not as exact as the lab, but still gives you a quick idea of what's happening with your field or your practice. I think if folks are interested in these, check with your extension office, check with Conservation District or NRCS, and they can hopefully hook you up with one of these. Talked a little bit about the nitrate test strips as kind of an easy way to get into monitoring. If they want to go beyond that, what are some options that they might have to get a little more accuracy, a little more precision with their monitoring?
Yeah, so The nitrate test strips give you kind of a general category, but if you're looking for specific results, you're probably going to want to work with a laboratory. You can work through a conservation professional, a project partner, or even directly with a lab, depending on your situation, on your location. But basically, the process is going to be where you're going to collect samples, you're going to get them to a lab where they can be analyzed, and then you'll get the results back at the end.
So what are the things they're going to need if they are collecting samples to send to a lab?
Yeah, so it might vary a little bit depending on who your partner is, but generally you're going to want to have a bottle to collect the sample in. You may need a collection tool to get down in there because the structures aren't always easy to reach the water. And then there'll be some sort of a chain of custody where you'll put the sample information, who took the sample, that'll be submitted to the lab so they know how it got from the tile line to the lab.
Okay, and then after they sampled it, ready to send it to the lab, what are they going to need for that?
So the next thing is, once the sample's collected, you're going to want to keep it cold. Either ice or perhaps ice packs, frozen ice packs can work. You're going to want to put it into a cooler. Either if you're going to drop it off in person, you can just put it in a cooler with ice. If you're going to ship it, some labs will give you a refrigerated package to ship it in. And get it right in the mail and send it to them as quick as you can.
Right, so you mentioned cooler and ice. Why is that important? Why do they need to put it on ice?
Well, so we have microbes that are in the bioreactor, the saturated buffer, that are doing the work. And so we want to slow them down so they don't continue to change the concentration and the forms of nitrogen in the sample between the time it's collected and the time that it gets analyzed.
You also mentioned a chain of custody form. Tell us maybe a little bit about what that is and why it's important.
Yeah, so when a sample arrives at a lab, they're going to want to know who took it, where it was taken, how long it's been since it was taken. And so they'll have some sort of a requirement either on the bottle or in the paperwork. Also, there'll be instructions that kind of specify what you're supposed to do with the sample when it's collected, depending on your project or partner.
So part of the basically the quality assurance to make sure that sample is doing what it's intended to do.
Yep, you want the sample to be as representative as possible to water, the conditions in the water when you actually collected the sample.
So we talked a little bit about timing and typically spring when water's flowing is the time to think about sampling. What are some other things they should be looking for in terms of collecting a sample then?
Yeah, ideally you'd like to collect the sample from moving water. That's going to be the most representative. So if you're able to get some device under there to collect it where it's falling over the stop log, that's ideal. If the water's just stagnant and kind of just calm behind the stop logs, it still can be valuable to take a sample there. It just may not be as representative as the actual tile flowing.
So ideally we're capturing flowing water. If we have to, we can capture stagnant water, but how do they actually go about then collecting the sample?
Well, you're going to need something to get down into the structure since most of us don't have long enough arms. And so really just any way you can rig up a simple device to put a bottle on a stick or a pump or something to get down into it. It'll depend on the size of your structure, what exactly you use. But anytime you collect a water sample with a secondary device, you want to make sure to rinse it 3 times to make sure you get anything that was previously in there out of there and that you're actually sampling the water you intend to.
So we talked about with bioreactors, to measure how a bioreactor is doing, you need to take a sample from both the inflow and the outflow control structures. With saturated buffers, we really only have the one control structure that allows the bypass. Everything else is going underground. And so if we want to monitor the performance of the saturated buffer, we really have to have a monitoring well like this. And so this will allow us to take a sample of that water as it's flowing through the buffer. So we have one here and we have another one closer to the stream. And so by measuring those differences, we can see how the saturated buffer is doing. So again, most regular sites are not going to have these monitoring wells, but if it's a saturated buffer that is in a monitoring program, that's how we would actually monitor the performance of a saturated buffer. All right, so thanks again, Tony. Thank you for watching. Again, check out the other videos again on managing saturated buffers and bioreactors and some of the other resources that we put together. And so with all those, hopefully that helps you feel a little more comfortable about dealing with one of these practices now that you've got it.